You can be a slave, tyrant, or you can negotiate. But the problem is your relationship with yourself is a mixture between a slave and a tyrant. Because you believe if only you had a bit more self-control, if only you could enact a bit more willpower, you could finally overcome your bad habits and live the life you've always dreamed of. But what if I told you this mindset is the exact reason you keep relapsing into your bad habits, fail to live the life you've always dreamed of, and feel powerless in your attempts to change your behaviour? And what if I told you instead there's an alternative that's not only easier, but requires no meditation, no affirmations, and no just control yourself advice? Well, you'd probably get down on one knee, propose, fly me off to Colombia for 7 years and feed me with coconut. Not quite sure where that fantasy came from, but here's the problem with self-control. You see, if I may boast a little bit, I've always been disciplined, but I have my moments. I can spend the whole week enacting the self-discipline of a sage, steering clear from temptations to scroll, eat junk food, and distract myself from the book in front of me, only for my week of discipline to be followed up by scrolling myself into oblivion, eating my body weight in digestive biscuits, and otherwise just doing anything I can to distract myself from sitting myself down to learn. I think the technical term for that is getting into a rut. But since I was 17, I've been fascinated with this psychological paradox of self-control. Because it seems the more you try to control yourself, the less control you have over yourself, otherwise known as the backwards law of life. So why doesn't self-control work? Well, first of all, we need to differentiate between two types of self-control. The first type of self-control we have is inhibitory self-control, also known as willpower. This is where, in a moment of temptation, you use your brain to say no. The second type of self-control we have is standard self-control. This is anything else you do in your behaviour besides mere willpower to regulate your behaviour. But the main problem we're going to talk about through the lens of self-control is with inhibitory self-control. Because trying to control your behaviour through mere willpower shows a lack of understanding of neuroscience and psychology. Let me explain, because that sounded very sarky. Oops, I've drawn the head the wrong way round. Nose. I should be a pro at this by now, but clearly not. There we go. As we've covered in previous videos, the part of your brain that is responsible when you saying no to temptation is your prefrontal cortex. In short, your prefrontal cortex is what gets you to do the hard thing when the hard thing is worth doing. But there's a catch to this beautiful brain region. Your prefrontal cortex gets tired, meaning there's only so many decisions you can make in the day, and there's only so many times you can enact willpower to say no to temptation. We'll get into that in a second. Think of it like a lemon. Not a lemon, a lemon. Of course, if you watched our last video, we covered a principle called lemon control in the context of dopamine, in the sense that the more you squeeze a lemon, the less juice you have. It's exactly the same with your brain. The more you use your brain, the less energy it will have. The more you use your prefrontal cortex, the more tired it will get. Not to mention, an older, more ancient brain region called the amygdala can easily override your prefrontal cortex when you're stressed or overly emotional. And one more thing, there are multiple other brain regions fighting for your attention at any given moment in time. For example, the amygdala just wants you to pay attention to the threats in your environment and your emotions. The dorsal striatum, the part of your brain which is responsible for your knee-jerk reactions and your habits, just wants you to do whatever you've usually done in that situation. Your nucleus accumbens, the circuitry in your brain that is responsible for the pleasure and reward you get, is saying, "Oh look, a cookie!" All the while your prefrontal cortex is saying, "Guys, but none of this will get us closer to our goals." Not to mention that your prefrontal cortex is a lot weaker than these other more ancient brain regions, hence I'm drawing it smaller. So, relying on your prefrontal cortex to control your behaviour with mere willpower is just like fighting the Mongols whilst naked, downhill, with 2 hours sleep and no weapons. It's a losing battle. So, as we've mentioned, willpower is just like a muscle. The more you use it, the less of it you have. In fact, when I was researching for this video, I found a very compelling study that shows, or it got volunteers to note down the amount of temptations they encountered over a week. And the results show the people who experience more temptations are less likely to achieve their long-term goals, regardless of whether they used willpower to say no to that temptation in the moment. Okay, Lewis, you bumbling idiot, if self-control is going to help us in the short term but not in the long term, what's the better alternative? Remove temptation. Here's why. By removing temptation from your environment, rather than actively overpowering it every time it comes up, you not only save yourself energy that you can divert towards other things that you find more meaningful. I do love dogs. I do love dogs. I do love dogs. I do love dogs. No, sorry, I live in a country where the population of dogs probably outpopulates people, and every Tom, Dick and Harry has one. I don't have a dog, but that dog always knows when I'm recording a video. What we were saying though is, by removing temptation from your environment, rather than actively and forcefully overpowering it every time it sprouts up, you not only save yourself energy that you can now divert towards other tasks that you find more meaningful and valuable, but you solve the core issue. At the end of the day, you can't eat a cookie you don't have. But to genuinely overcome temptation, but to genuinely overcome temptation and to never give in to it again, no matter what it is, you have to understand the temptation generation cycle as highlighted by Angela Duckworth, who is a researcher and psychologist, and her colleagues. So when a temptation arises, there are 4 stages you cognitively go through that make that temptation indulgeable or not. So you have the situational stage, the attentional stage, the appraisal stage, and finally the response stage. Let me highlight what each stage encapsulates now. Let's take the example of eating a cookie. So in the first stage, let me number them. In the situational stage, you had to put yourself in the situation to be tempted to eat the cookie. So you put yourself in that situation by going to the shop and buying the cookies. Then you come back home. You're now in the attentional stage where you leave the cookies on the side and you're focusing on them with your cognitive effort. Maybe you look at them as you walk by. In the appraisal stage, this is where you start to imagine the deliciousness of eating that cookie. Maybe you imagine eating it with a glass of milk or what have you. And in the final response stage, this is where you eat the cookie. So when you conceptualize the temptations that you encounter throughout your days through the lens of this framework, you're able to realize, oh, multiple things had to go wrong before I reached this 4th stage and indulged in the temptation, which is good news. Because that means, rather than just enacting willpower when you encounter the temptation, there are multiple other things that you can do which will help you enact self-control and get you out of a sticky, tempting situation. So what we're going to do now is highlight what you can do in each stage to master the temptation as opposed to just using pure willpower. To tackle the first stage, the situational stage, remember, you had to put yourself in that scenario where you felt tempted to do that thing. So, cookie example, don't buy the cookie. Second of all, don't sit there and try to not eat the cookie. Technically, this is known as situation selection, so removing the cookie from sight, or situation modification, throwing the cookie away. Also, another study I found shows that students who remove their phone from their environment rather than using mere willpower to say no to the temptation to scroll are more likely to achieve their academic goals. Now, mastering the situational stage is much easier with physical things such as food, drugs, or alcohol. Just remove them from your environment. But it's trickier with other things that you can't necessarily remove. For example, if you're working online, of course you might be tempted to scroll on YouTube or watch explicit content. Now, of course, you can get app blockers, but they don't necessarily work because your brain sees it like a game, meaning you release more dopamine to overcome the barrier, meaning it becomes more rewarding when you eventually indulge in that temptation. In my experience, app blockers and that don't work. Second of all, what if, okay, Lewis, it's great, you can easily remove the thing from your physical environment, but what if you live with someone where you don't have the luxury to remove the temptation? Well, move into the second stage. Okay, stage number 2 is the attentional stage. I'm sure you've heard of the marshmallow experiment before, but just in case you haven't, in one of the most notorious studies ever conducted, researchers got young children to sit down in front of a marshmallow, and the options were they could eat the marshmallow or wait 10 minutes and they would be rewarded with 2. All the while the researcher was outside of the room, so the child had to control their own behaviour. And the results show the successful children who delayed gratification and got 2 marshmallows showed signs of being more successful and better off later in life. But we rarely, if ever, hear about the strategies the successful kids used to withstand temptation. The successful kids used something known as call-in strategies, whereby they diverted their attention away from the temptation. Some children started to sing out loud or look around the room and not focus on the marshmallow in front of them. So the point is, it's hard, if not impossible, to be tempted by something you're not paying attention to. So, through a further lens of self-development, look at all of the things in your immediate environment as a demand for your attention, good or bad, and readjust them accordingly. Have a look in your room, your living room, your kitchen, your car, and see what things are causing you to pay attention to them and be lured into the slippery slope of temptation. The third stage to master is the appraisal stage. The second strategy that the successful kids used in the marshmallow experiment was something known as reappraisal. They didn't just see the marshmallow as some sugary treat, but they reinterpreted it as a puffy white cloud. All of a sudden, it didn't have such a elusive lure to it. This is also known as something called down-regulation. You can consider the temptation that you're facing right now as having a very big emotional pull on you because you likely see it as something pleasurable. However, if you decrease the intensity of that emotional lure by down-regulating it, you limit the effect this temptation has on you. For example, scrolling becomes a brain-zapping activity that rots your mind. Junk food becomes an expensive habit that rots your stomach. Watching exclusive content as a man or whatever becomes a draining activity which depletes you of your testosterone and makes you incredibly socially anxious and more likely to be lonely for the rest of your life. Suddenly those things aren't as attractive now. Get creative, reappraise them in whatever way you want. That was a last-ditch attempt to try and get a third example in. Anyway, finally, the last stage to master is the response stage. Sorry, can you see that? Yeah, you can. One thing I want you to do in this stage is something called if-then strategies. I've been doing it this week, and my God, it is changing my life. I did it this morning. This is where you create a plan beforehand for you to replace the negative behavior you want to change with a positive one when temptation arises. For example, your if-then plan might be, if I want to check YouTube while I'm working, I'll set a 10-minute timer and then stop checking YouTube when the timer ends. Or, if I find myself scrolling, I'll text or call a friend to see how they're doing instead. Now, this is going to work best for you in more specific situations. And again, the technical term for this is called surf the urge. There was a quote I heard, I think it was Baltasar Gracian. I heard it when I was like 18, and it's a very simple quote, and it says something like, let the first impulse pass, wait for the second. And I don't know why that always stayed with me in moments of temptation. And I experienced it this morning. I was reading, and usually I read about 90 minutes in the morning, and then I do some deep work after that. But while I was reading, I got the urge to distract myself and go onto YouTube. But I said to myself, okay, let me surf this urge for 10 minutes. I didn't set a timer, but what you should do is set a timer. And within 2 minutes, the urge went. You give yourself immense self-realization and self-confidence when you realize your urges are like waves. They come and they go, and all you need to do is surf them. So let me just draw it up here quickly. So to go one final step further, if you find yourself in the response stage, battling the temptation, after all of these stages, there are 3 things you can do. You can engage in the urge later, a little bit, for example, you have half a cookie, or for a short time. For example, you only scroll YouTube for 5 minutes. Because as Professor of Psychology, I forgot her name, Marina Miliaskaya says, later often turns into never, and a little bit of indulgence is better than a lot. There's a lot of truth to that. So to finalise, wait, moment of silence for the framework. Fucking dogs, shut up. Sorry, just interrupted the moment of silence, didn't I? Oh, so to finalise this whole segment, the key takeaway from all of this is the more strategies you use to overcome temptation rather than mere willpower, the more successful you'll be. About 2.3 times more successful for each strategy you use, according to Miliaskava's research. So taken all together, the main thing I wanted to communicate to you in this video is you need to stop blaming yourself for your lack of willpower or your ability to control yourself. You do have a weak willpower muscle, as do most of us, and that's not a bad thing, because there's no reason to believe that by merely increasing your willpower, you're going to be more successful in life or in the areas you want to improve in. See it as a dichotomy between brute force and being strategic. The more strategy you enact within your self-control rather than brute force, the more you're going to be like Hercules rather than Sisyphus, a man who was cursed by the Greek gods to continuously push a huge boulder up a hill only to watch it fall down again, and he would have to repeat the process until eternity. That's what it's like when you try to control yourself with mere willpower. Be strategic. Don't rely on brute force. Feel free to end the video here, but if you want to go one step deeper, there are 2 things that I just want to add to what we've spoken about. The main theme of what we've spoken about in this video has been cultivating a better relationship with yourself, moving away from being a tyrant or a slave to a form of negotiation. And recently, after meditating a lot on this topic, I've come up with a new concept called self-negotiation to help you cultivate a better relationship with yourself. I've been practicing this in my own time, and it's been revolutionising my life. Here's what I mean by self-negotiation. Self-negotiation is a wholehearted understanding that you're never going to be able to escape yourself. You are going to be with yourself for the rest of your life, and the most important the most important relationship you have in your life is the one with yourself. So that's what you must cultivate every single day. Because what you want to avoid, ideally, in your life, is states of conflict with yourself. Because the best way to maintain your mental health is to engage in this process of self-negotiation. Because remember, you don't want to be a tyrant to yourself, you don't want to be a slave to yourself, you want to negotiate. So there are 3 things you can do which will help you improve your self-negotiation. Because I'm probably biased towards this point of view because I've worked in sales before, and I think negotiation is a skill that most people don't have and most people would benefit of in the realm of social skills, but we never hear about negotiating with yourself because we think it's weird to treat yourself as this other entity who you have to engage with like a genuine human being. But negotiation. By seeing yourself in this way, you not only befriend yourself, but you'll start to notice that you get out of this self-conflict realm and into self-harmony. So the 3 things you can do. The main thing I would like you to do is something in negotiation called go into the balcony. You can imagine if you are in a genuine negotiation in a business context and you're sat at a table with the board of directors of multiple companies, you're negotiating a deal, but it's been hours into the negotiation process, tension has become high, people are starting to get distracted, and all of you have lost the common purpose around which you are negotiating. At that point, what you need to do is individually distance yourself from the conversation and negotiation by going outside, taking a breath and really sitting with yourself and thinking, right, guys, what are we negotiating about here? You can do the exact same with yourself when you're experiencing a moment of extreme temptation, or you're acting in a way that you don't fully understand, or you're in the enticing grip of an emotive energy within you, otherwise known as you're experiencing a very intense emotion and you don't understand why. You go to the balcony, you get yourself some distance from the situation. For me, I go on a walk, no matter how badly I feel. 40% of the time, by the way, when I go on a walk and talk to myself out loud, I don't actually want to go, but I never regret going. 40% of the time as well, when I'm on the walk, I don't want to start speaking to myself out loud because I think, oh, there's nothing to talk about or whatever. But when I do, I start to engage this self-relationship with myself because I'm getting to the heart of, okay, in this moment, what do I actually want? What needs are you trying to fulfill? I want you to really, really understand that the best way to cultivate a good relationship with yourself so you're not in conflict is to understand this word. All of the different parts of yourself, the amygdala, the dorsal striatum, the nucleus accumbens, the other more archetypal parts of yourself, all have needs they're trying to fulfill, and it is your job, of course, through the prefrontal cortex to give yourself that opportunity to have the metacognition to say, okay, guys, what do you want? What do you want? What do I want? What is the best way for us to meet these needs? Approach yourself through the theme of curiosity and inquiry rather than mere judgment. And then once you start to engage that conversation with yourself about, okay, what need am I actually trying to fulfill when I'm scrolling? What need am I trying to fulfill when I feel tempted to relapse into that bad habit? Oh, I just want some social connection. Oh, I just want to distract myself because I'm struggling with the studying in front of me. Then you need to find your BATNA, which is something in negotiation known as the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. When one part of you wants something that you're now in conflict with because your higher reasoning doesn't want you to do that bad habit or that thing, that's when you have to divert your conversation with yourself towards, okay, Lewis, I understand that you, or chimp brain, I understand that you want to distract yourself from studying right now. Look, we've got 30 minutes left, so what I can suggest, if it's okay with you, is if we finish these 30 minutes, we can scroll YouTube for 10 minutes when we're done to give you that feeling of relief. How does that sound? And if you agree with the alternative negotiated agreement that you've proposed to yourself, then by all means, do it. One more self-directed technique you might like to do to improve your self-negotiation is get 2 chairs set up and you sit in one chair and look towards the other as if that part of you you're negotiating with is in the other chair, and you channel your voice through that part of you that has the conflicting need, and then in the other chair you enact the human within you, the prefrontal cortex, the higher level of reasoning to negotiate with this part of yourself. It's like the cheapest way of doing therapy, but it works. I've done it many times before. Just be prepared for the questions of the people that you live with as to who you were talking to. Oh, just my imaginary friend. Anyway, self-negotiation is about having a strong, unconditional agreement to yourself that no matter what situation you find yourself in, you will negotiate to find the best way for you to fulfill your needs. Now, to end this video, here's a final word of warning from me about your mental health. I would like you to understand that a lot of the messages we get fed of self-development or even modern psychology through self-help books or social media algorithms promote the message that if you improve your mental health enough, or if you become disciplined enough, then you will complete the mental health and the discipline game. If you're anything like me, and I'm going to make this assumption because you're a human being, I hope, you believe deep down that, or you want deep down to become disciplined enough so that you'll never have to act with discipline again. That you want to improve your mental health or your social skills enough so one day you can finally relax into the freedom of never having to worry about those things again. Essentially, you want to let go of a big weight you've been carrying around, which is this idea of completion, and finally, relax into freedom. But this isn't a very sexy message for me to give you. There is no completion to the discipline game, to the mental health game, or to the social skills game. Which is to say, there's no completion of anything in life. This idea that you have of a future state that you will arrive into in the future of pure freedom and bliss is never coming. To say there's no solution is missing one more piece of information though, because there is a solution. The solution is to realise that there is no solution. And that is what allows you to finally relax into the freedom of not expecting a completion of anything to come. That is a very long-winded way of me to say that from now until the rest of your life, your job every single day isn't to solve your mental health. It's to maintain. I want you to stop fascinating with this idea of completion, because it is the one thing that is undermining your ability to improve your mental health. What I mean by this in particular, and to use another quote, because we've been on the quote machine this video, so we might as well distill a few more. Winston Churchill famously said, "Most men stumble over the truth, but then they pick themselves back up and carry on as if nothing happened." I probably butchered that quote, so check down there. And what that means is the little things that you do in life, rather than the big fantastical changes you can make, provide you with a lot more reward and bang for your buck than any big fantastical change could ever offer. Most change is boring. Most maintenance is very boring. What I mean by that is cooking a nutritious meal, doing a workout, going on a walk and talking to yourself each day, or making sure you have one conversation with a loved one per day, are much more boring things than paying $500 for a mental health course and jetting off to another country in the world and completely uprooting your life and enacting your change in that way. The former things I mentioned are a lot more boring than the latter things. But the former things are the things that you'll need to do every day, and if you do them, will provide you with the most benefit. So, I implore you to be human with the same artful grace with which a tree is a tree. Again, that's another way of saying from now until the rest of your life, to put it neuroscientifically, your job every day is to balance, and recalibrate your prefrontal cortex and the higher reasoning you're capable of in your brain with your older, more impulsive, ancient brain regions. There's another quote by Horace, I believe, which goes something like this: "You can try to throw out Mother Nature with a pitchfork, but she'll always come running back." Which is to say, you cannot neglect your nature, nor can you ignore it. Human nature is structured to be a certain way, so you cannot discard it. It's the same with your brain. You cannot change the way your brain is structured, which means you can't change the fact that you have parts of you that want you to eat the cookie or engage in the most impulsive things, and the other part of you that wants you to strive towards your goals. You can't get rid of those impulsive parts within you. All you can do is maintain them and balance them so that you can flourish in life. Maintenance for me is, I know that if I don't work out, if I don't go on a walk at least 2 times a day and talk to myself out loud, if I don't wake up and go to bed at the same time, then my mental health is going to decrease in quality. I have to do those things every day in order to maintain. There's one more quote that I would like to share with you. I'm pretty sure there's one more quote, but the quote is from Albert Camus, and I've mentioned it before, but the important thing is not to be cured, but to live with one's ailments. Ailments means diseases, so we can use that synonymously with the parts of yourself that you can't change. And you might think, because that's not a very sexy message, why do I have to do this every single day? We feel like Sisyphus. The state of human beings is very much like him pushing that boulder up the hill. But one thing that Albert Camus highlighted in his book, The Myth of Sisyphus, where he elaborated on this philosophical conundrum, is he said, one must imagine Sisyphus happy. It is in the things that we do daily that we usually see as mundane, the low-hanging fruit, that give our lives the most amount of meaning. And one more quote: training is like sweeping the floor. Just because we've done it once doesn't mean the floor is clean forever. Every day the dust comes back. Every day we must sweep. We can use training there synonymously for the detriments in your mental health. Impulses, urges, temptations, and emotions, and impulsivity is always going to come back. Resistance is always going to come back. You must meet it every single day. Now, that's not to say that things don't get easier, because of course the more you're able to improve your maintenance skills of your mental health and your self-control, the better at it you will get. Which means that your spawn point for tomorrow, you'll arrive into tomorrow with more strength depending on the maintenance that you've done today. But that just means that it's easier to face the maintenance of tomorrow. It doesn't mean that the maintenance of tomorrow won't come and it will be completed forever. Thank you for listening to my philosophical rambles, and remember, remove temptation and self-negotiate. Thank you for your time and attention. I appreciate you much more than you know. The problem I struggle with in my job is not a productivity problem, it's a connection problem. I would love more than anything to jump through this camera right now and listen to you, talk to you about whatever you're struggling with right now and potentially help you in those areas. So behind the scenes, a couple of things I've been working on is I've been studying like a madman everything I can about mental health and social skills, with the aims that in 2025, early around February perhaps, we will be releasing a school community where you guys, if you want to go deeper into these topics, we can all come together. That sounds a bit weird. We can all bring ourselves together and really apply our minds to behaviour change and improving our mental health and social skills. I'll also be releasing a separate course called The Art of Social Poise as well around the same time, which will be in the community anyway, but if you didn't want to join a community, then you can just buy the course. It will be hours of content that I've been synthesising and generating behind the scenes, all within the context of social skills, how to start interactions with people, how to channel vulnerability, someone's just binned a bin, how to channel vulnerability without being over-friendly, how to make every conversation the best you've ever had, how to listen attentively, how to manage conflict, be assertive, set boundaries, all of the stuff that you need to know. There'll be around 20 modules. So if you want to be updated on when all of those things will be released, feel free to go down to the description, join the newsletter, which is completely for free. You'll get a letter of wisdom to your inbox every Thursday, which is a mental health tip, social skills tip, and a personal reflection, as well as the updates on everything that I'll be releasing. Feel free to do that if you want to. If you don't want to, that's absolutely fine. Otherwise, stay disciplined, playful, and dangerous. Adiós, muchachos y muchachas. Ha sido un placer como siempre.